Hi students, and welcome back to Computer Practice with Mr. H. We are still busy with the question paper, the internal question paper of semester 2, 2024. And we are continuing with part 2 of the question. Part 1 was about formula A and B, H and V lookups. And now we're going to continue with formula C, B, E, F, and G. All right, so let's go to our spreadsheet. Before we do, let's determine what we need to do. Calculate the total distance traveled by using the values in the distance traveled per staff member column. So calculate the total distance traveled. Students, whenever you are asked to calculate a total of anything, that means that you need to use equal sum. Equal sum. So if I go to my spreadsheet, we need to work out the total of the distance traveled. And here we have the distance per staff member in kilometers. All right. And we need to determine what is the total distances that were traveled. It's literally just equal sum. Equal sum. And then we select our range and we close the sum and we press enter. Altogether, 346 kilometers were traveled by the following people together. All right, now we're going to work out the percentage traveled. In other words, we want to know Roger, for example. Roger traveled 80 kilometers. He altogether, everyone else altogether eventually worked out to 346 kilometers altogether. We want to know Roger's 80 kilometers. How many or what is the percentage traveled? How much percent did Roger travel? He only traveled 80 kilometers. So how much percent is that? If we take this and this, if we use this, if we use this amount and this amount, how much percent is that eventually going to work out as? So let's read the question. Calculate the percentage traveled by using the value you calculated by total distance traveled. Display the values as percentages with no decimals. All right, so equals, whenever you have to work out a percentage, it's a division. So equals 8 divided by 346. Press enter. All right, that's the answer. If we click on it and we go to home and we change it to percentage, and we either, if there was any decimals, we have to remove the decimals. There shouldn't be any decimals. That is the answer. But students, I need you to focus. Please note what is going to happen next. The moment you copy the formula down, you are going to experience error messages. Either a value is incorrect or there's a division problem. There's a division problem. All right. How do I fix that? I'm going to redo the whole formula again. And we need to fix it by using an absolute reference. We need to reference something. So in other words, equals 80 divided by 346. All right. There are many different kilometers for the many different names, but they all need to be divided by one total distance. So we need to reference this total difference. Because there's only one of it, we need to reference it so that the formula can use this for the others as well. In the previous example, the formula was not able, it didn't recognize what it needs to divide because we didn't reference it in the first place. So how do I reference it? Once you click on the absolute number, you have to press F4 on your keyboard, F4, the function key F4 on your keyboard to insert the dollar signs, the referencing symbols. Once you have done that, you press enter, and then you can copy the formula down. Okay, that's very important. Next question. Use an appropriate function to display the travel expenses for each staff member. If the staff member traveled 75 kilometers or more, display as high expense. If not, display as low expense. Students, whenever you see in your formula, they are referring to if something is the case. If. That should immediately tell you that this is an if calculation. Now, an if calculation, usually a normal basic if calculation, has only two conditions. There will always only be two conditions for a basic if calculation. Okay? So there's a high expense condition in this case and a low expense condition. And then there's a criteria that I need to use. Okay, so if a staff member has traveled 75 or more, condition high expense. Less than 75, condition low expense. So let's go back to our spreadsheet so that we can determine our answer. So it's an if calculation that we're going to use. You click on formula, you go to insert function. You can also find it under logical if, but the best way is to click on insert function, search for an if, find it, and click OK. As I mentioned earlier, a basic if calculation has only two conditions, true or false. And then it has a logical test. In other words, this is the question that you're asking. In this case, we need to determine, or we want to actually display the words high expense and low expense in our spreadsheet. The ones that is high expense are going to be the ones that drove more than 75 kilometers, and the ones that are going to be displayed as low expense drove less than 75 kilometers. So the logical test is, if this amount, the distance is, if this distance is more than, also called greater than, that's the, you have to insert the greater than symbol, which is on your keyboard. So greater than or more than or equal to. So if this amount is greater than or equal to what? To 75. If it is true, if it is more than 75, then what must happen? Well, it is a high expense. And obviously, the opposite of that would be a low expense. Let's see our answer. Let's click OK. Copy the formula down. And there's our answer. Now, students, we are going to go to the next question. Use an appropriate function to display the comment high if the staff member traveled 75 kilometers or more. Display the comment medium if the staff member traveled more than 30 kilometers. Display the comment low for a staff member that traveled less than 30. All right, so there are 1, 2, 3 conditions. 3 conditions in this if calculation. How do I know it's an if? Because the formula specifies if the staff member so because the word if is used, that's how I know it's an if calculation. But a basic if usually have 2 conditions. But here there's 1, 2, 3 conditions. Students, this means that this if calculation is going to will have to be a nested if. In other words, it's an if calculation, a basic if calculation with an add-on. There's an if within an if. So let's see, how are we going to calculate this one? First of all, they start with high, medium, and then low. There's two similar kilometers. There's two conditions here, and then there's a third condition that is different from the two. So we are going to start with this one first, and then we're going to do this one. So these two are only two conditions. So we're going to end off with a basic if, and we're going to start with the nested if. So let's see. The only concern with a nested if, when there's three or more conditions, you will have to build this yourself. So we're testing your building skills. Here we've tested your functioning skills. Are you able to use a function? Over here we're testing your building skills. Can you build a formula? So we start off equal, and then you start with typing in if, double click, so you can get an open bracket. Then you type in your first condition. So you're asking if this amount is 80, if that amount is more than 75, then something needs to happen. Well, you need to separate first, because we now need to insert a word. We need to say high. High is an actual word, and if you use a word in a formula, then you need to type it into double quotes. Okay, in other words, next to your semicolon button on your keyboard, you will see quotation marks, but we call them double quotes. So you include the word inside of the double quotes. So in other words, you first separate by using a semicolon. You type in, or you press the quotation mark button so you can get quotation marks. You type in the word high, you close your quotation, separate with a semicolon, because now you are ready for the next part. You've now specified, you've set the parameter for 75. Now we need to go over to the 30s. In other words, it's another if. So after your semicolon, you include another if. Double click so you can get another open bracket. And this time around, it is again, if this amount is more than 30, then semicolon, separate, type in your quotation. What must happen is going to be a medium, close your quotation, separate, because your next condition, quotation, low, close condition, close your bracket. Okay, what am I seeing here? So we have three conditions here. We have high, medium, and low. If this 80 is more than 75, a high will be displayed. Then we went on to the second condition. If this amount is less than 30, then medium will be displayed, and then the obvious opposite of that, because there's two 30s, so we're including both in here. The opposite of that, a low, will be displayed. Now remember, this one is a basic if with two conditions, and there's a third condition, and we started with the third condition. We separated the different conditions with semicolons and with inverted commas where we wanted to display the words. We are not done yet, because there's one crucial step. We've opened a bracket when we started the if calculation.